crisis in comparative psychology. Where have all the undergraduates gone? Charles A. Abramson is a comparative psychology professor at Oklahoma State University with over 30 years of experience in his field of study. In 2011, he published the article, A Crisis in Comparative Psychology. Where have all the undergraduates gone? Expressing his concern about the decreasing number of universities offering comparative psychology courses and the stagnant state of the field. This article got a good amount of attention, and although Abramson makes valid points about how comparative psychology is not exactly the most popular field of study for undergraduates, responses to his publication presented an alternative perspective on the current state of comparative psychology. The main issues Abramson addresses on his article are the lack of graduate programs based especially on comparative psychology, a single currently available comparative textbook, few undergraduate courses dedicated to this field, the portrayal in introductory psychology texts, and finally, suggestions to help increase undergraduate interest in comparative psychology. Furthermore, Abramson expresses personal thoughts on what he considers a major problem facing comparative psychology in the United States, which is the lack of comparative psychology students in the nation, and even presenting data regarding the same field of study in other nations. These are some of the specific topics that Abram mentions on his article. Number 1. The lack of comparative psychology graduate programs. A search of the website Psychology Career Center lists only 2 programs, one at the University of Mary Harding-Baylor and the other at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington. Other sites, such as the Psychology School Guide and Degree Directory, present only perfunctory information. While students can't find many institutions that study animal behavior, there are a few institutions where comparative psychology can be studied. There is no graduate program in comparative psychology at the institutions where the last 2 comparative texts were written. Number 2. The lack of textbook resources for the study of comparative psychology. The last comparative psychology text was written by Papini in 2002, with the second edition in 2008. A couple of years ago, Abramson submitted a proposal to write a comparative text, and after the publishing house conducted some market research, he was told that there is no market for a comparative psychology textbook. Only 12.6% of the top 650 universities have comparative psychology listed in their course catalog, but not all of them actually offer the course. Therefore, it is not surprising that a publisher will not invest in a comparative psychology text. In comparison, 26 comparative psychology textbooks were written, including multiple editions between 1882 and 1942. However, this represents an outdated reference, because currently only 4 of these comparative psychology textbooks are accessible. Number 3. Few undergraduate courses dedicated to comparative psychology. The 650 colleges that Forbes magazine considers the best were surveyed, and only 82, or 12.6%, offered an undergraduate course in comparative psychology. The coming years, this number will further decrease, if for no other reason than no one will be left on the faculty to teach the course. Although, the article does not provide data on the number of U.S. colleges and universities from 1889 to 1923. Courses on comparative psychology were offered at 39 schools. However, this information might be outdated. The information obtained in a comparative course might be included in other course offerings such as evolutionary psychology and animal behavior, but a comparative psychology course on its own provides unique advantages. Next, the portrayal of comparative psychology in introductory psychology texts. Out of 13 popular introductory psychology textbooks, only 4 mention comparative psychology. The descriptions are very brief and highlighted the research of a particular comparative psychologist, or comparative psychology is discussed within the context of ethics in research, or included in a brief comment on the various areas of psychology. Nothing in these descriptions encourages the reader to learn more about comparative psychology. Even if a student does become interested in this field of study, based on the material presented in an introductory text, it is difficult for them to find any further accurate information, especially avoiding the criticisms of comparative psychology. Entries about comparative psychology in encyclopedias are all too often superficial, and none of the descriptions motivate the reader to learn more about comparative psychology. Next, suggestions to help increase undergraduate interest in comparative psychology. Abramson's main goal is to recruit the next generation of comparative psychologists, making it clear to students that comparative psychology is absolutely concerned with human behavior. Focus on how the comparative method is applied, for example, to an analysis of cultural and social practices and how these human behaviors relate to those found in animals. The contribution of underrepresented groups to comparative psychology is also seldom discussed. Students must be taught that many animal psychologists clearly state that their work is designed to be integrated and compared with human behavior. A search of early comparative texts reveals a similar concern with connecting animal and human behavior. The comparative method has been extended into the field of robotics. And finally, students must understand that comparative psychology develops broad skills, including problem solving, apparatus design, and knowing what to compare and how to compare. According to the article, Keep Calm and Comp Cog On Commentary, A Crisis in Comparative Psychology, Where Have All the Undergraduates Gone? By Valerie A. Kohlmeyer and Mary C. Olmsted. We have recently authored an undergraduate textbook entitled Comparative Cognition. Our motivation to write this book did not result from a perceived lack of undergraduate interest in the topic, but rather over-enrolled courses for which we did not have a textbook. We have been trained under various titles: biological, anthropology, behavioral, ecology, ethology, cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, and behavioral neuroscience, and have witnessed the continued emergence of comparative cognition as the logical intersection of these disciplines. Our point here goes beyond an argument about semantics. In particular, comparative cognition is quite similar to comparative psychology, aside from restricting its research questions and measures to those specific to information processing. Comparative cognition is open to the possibility of cognitive processes, but it actively tests for them. It also goes far beyond comparing behavioral responses of species X to that of humans, an anthropocentric approach that only a subset of researchers adopts, often with appropriate consideration of phylogenetics. And gone are the days of studying only a few unrelated species. Comparative cognition research in the first decade of the 21st century was characterized by an increasing number of species examined and more synergy with related fields, such as behavioral ecology. We see them missing undergraduates every week, 200 of them this term alone in a second-year survey course, Introduction to Comparative Cognition. Many of these students will take our upper-level laboratory courses that focus on specialized topics within the field of comparative cognition. We trust that they all pursue their chosen area of study with a greater appreciation and engagement in the basic comparative science that informs so many fields of study. Number 2. Commentary by Michael J. Biran, Brill T. James, Sarah E. Fudge, and Audrey Parrish. MJB circulated this article to get reactions from his co-authors, given that they presently are heavily invested in comparative psychology at various stages of their careers, to see how they perceive its future. None of us felt that as undergraduates we needed a course in comparative psychology, formally, to have found our way to being interested in comparative psychology, which was good because none of us had such a course. MJB, for example, took courses in learning and behavior and cognitive psychology that led him to potential graduate programs in comparative psychology, primarily in areas focused on cognition and psychopharmacology. In addition, BTG noted that she also took the comparative psychology classes that were hidden under other names, such as primate behavior, biological anthropology, and similars, but that for her, this still led to comparative psychology as a graduate student. Thus, we believe that the students who go into other specializations are not disengaged with the field of comparative psychology. We agree with Abramson that comparative psychology needs to be clearer in its projection to students of what it offers by way of broad skills learned while studying this area. We appreciate Dr. Abramson's concern that the comparative psychology not to be confused or worse equated with comparative cognition. Comparative cognition draws upon evolutionary biology, anthropology, animal behavior, physiology, neuroscience, linguistics, and other fields, many of which also overlap to varying degrees with comparative psychology while not being the same as comparative psychology. It probably is true that the typical undergraduate best equates the idea of comparative psychology with approaches in comparative cognition, or perhaps, depending on the department, with Pavlovian and Skinnerian learning theories. Three of the most critical issues facing undergraduates who might consider graduate training in comparative psychology are: Number 1, access to animal research as undergraduates. Number 2, the sense that animal research is under increasing threat from animal rights advocates. And number 3, limited career opportunities, especially in academia, for those trained on this field. At the same time, jobs for comparative psychologists may take other names and even come from non-psychology departments, such as evolutionary biology, but they still exist and still require students trained in the methods of comparative psychology. Comparative psychology as a distinct training tradition may fade, but if students still are exposed to rigorous methods for studying animal and human behavior in traditions such as comparative cognitive science, developmental science, biological science, or neuroscience, comparative psychology as a field is alive and well and still highly attractive to future students. Article number 3, Enhancing Student Interest in Animals by Carla Crutchen. Abramson's article confirmed what I have come to realize in several years of teaching. Many psychology students have a general lack of enthusiasm for studying animals. In my department, the consequence is that courses in animal behavior and cognition have been offered on an infrequent basis, cancelled due to low enrollment, or given more human content to widen their appeal. Dumpton and Purdy in 1995 also reported a common failure of introductory texts to acknowledge animal studies, and they found that findings from animal research were often presented as if they had been obtained from humans. All of this sends students the message that research with animals is uncommon, unimportant, or irrelevant in psychology. Of 55 institutions offering undergraduate programs, less than a third refer to animals, including using words like organisms or other species in their descriptions of psychology. Most websites also included an image on their undergraduate homepage, depicting everything from inkblots to brain scans to students and faculty engaged in research. However, in only a couple of instances did the image include or make reference to animals. Making students aware of the many exciting animal-related professions that exist could also help in recruiting more students into animal courses. The lack of enthusiasm many students have for studying animals may be based on incomplete or erroneous information about the role of animals in psychology. The ideas presented here are immediately small measures. Other approaches that have the potential to make greater impact should, of course, also be pursued. These include, for example, recruiting students into our labs where they can experience animal research firsthand, encouraging the hiring of colleagues who have an interest in comparative psychology, and pushing to have more animal courses offered or cross-listed with other programs. Article number 4, What's in a Name, by Matthias Osbeth and Thomas Persson. In contrast to Abramson, we do not think that a fading name equals a dying science. On the contrary, it is likely a sign of developing science and a more multifaceted education. That a discipline's name does not contain comparative does not mean that comparisons are not made or are crucial. If subscribing to the definition given by Abramson, similarities and differences in the behavior of organisms, it is in fact difficult to imagine an animal science without any comparison. Comparisons with humans, especially, are ubiquitous in many disciplines. That such disciplines will not offer training in making valid comparisons, whatever that is, appears to be an unfounded assumption. The crux of the matter seems to be that Abramson lacks a place for the comparative study of behavior without reference to cognition. Still, he wants to call this psychology and demand a place for this in introductory texts and courses of psychology. The study of animal behaviors and minds has always been an eclectic enterprise. Fractionalization is a natural result of both the dynamics of science and the branding necessary to explain a field's content. We regret to learn that Abramson seems a need for faculties to point out the value of comparative psychology. Comparative psychology has been a discipline mainly of North American concern, and Abramson's paper is heavy with references to American conditions. In Europe, there has traditionally been a focus on the biological disciplines, such as ethology. One should not be surprised in not finding many programs and courses named comparative psychology when browsing European universities. In Sweden, we call the subject cognitive zoology, and for pedagogical reasons, we call our courses animal cognition. This subject is listed under different names in Australia and the UK. In order to judge whether or not this is the case, a more qualitative analysis is required. Article number 5 is just evolution by Madeline L.R. Broadbeck and Dave Broadbeck.